Welcome to the Orthodox West Gazette, a miscellany of talks, interviews, ponderings, and presentations. I'm Stephen Brannon, and today, or tonight rather, it happens to be a little later right now, I'm talking again with Father Patrick Cardine, this time about a recent article that he wrote in an Orthodox journal about the fact that in the broader Orthodox world, there's something of an anti-Western bias at work. Sometimes. Among some. Can you believe it? We discuss where this bias came from, what it means for the church, and what it's like, from personal experience with both of us, to become aware of this bias and change mindsets. We hope you'll find this conversation beneficial. Hey, Father Patrick, thank you so much for joining me again.
Hi, Stephen. Great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Good to be talking again. It's been a little while, as seems to be our MO, because life is busy, and parish life, especially when you're a pastor, is busy. So yeah. I'm glad you could carve out some time to talk.
Well, thank you for setting this up. I appreciate it.
Totally. The occasion for us talking today is because you have recently written an article for the Basilian Journal, which is the journal for the St. Basil Center for Orthodox Thought and Culture. And this article that you wrote is titled "Why the Eastern Orthodox Church Needs the Western Rite." And so I just want to go through the article a little bit and talk about some of its content, maybe a little bit of the rationale for why you wanted to write it. And if you could... I don't know, maybe introduce it by introducing the Basilian Journal, if folks maybe haven't heard about that.
Sure. The journal is a physical publication, and Cyril Jenkins is founded this, and the Society of St. Basil. He was a professor at Eastern University in Pennsylvania. And Cyril is a great, he's a wonderful Orthodox Christian intellectual. He's founding a school up in the Lehigh Valley, and he's also a good friend. So they produce this journal a couple times a year, and it's a print journal, as I said. And he had contacted me and asked if I'd like to maybe write an article for it. He wanted to feature something on the Western Rite. And he suggested, maybe an article on the philosophy of the Western Rite and Eastern Orthodoxy. So I said, okay, well, I guess I'll take a stab at that. He had asked myself and one other priest, and the other priest declined, probably the wiser of the two of us. But I said, well, I'll give it a try. So I sat down and I began to think about this. It was just a short article, 10 pages or so. And as I began to think about how to address the question of laying out a philosophy for why we should have the Western Rite, or how do we go about having the Western Rite? Those are two different questions, really.
Yep.
In Eastern Orthodoxy,
yeah.
The why, the apologia for it, and then the method and the approach and the implementation.
Right.
But before I felt like I could, launch into either one of those, I thought, I really need to deal with, a challenge facing the growth and the presence of the Western Rite in the church. And that is this anti-Western bias or sentiment that exists within Eastern Orthodoxy. And I thought I need to at least, address this. And originally I was just going to write a couple paragraphs about it, just mention it, real quick gloss. And I realized I started writing the paragraphs, and they just started to expand a little bit more and more. And I thought, a paragraph or two are not really, it's going to be meaningless. It's just going to be a couple platitudes, and that's going to be it. So I also at the same time realized there was no way to cover the larger question of a philosophy of the Western Rite, either an apologetic for it or its implementation in any meaningful way in such a short space. So I thought,
Sure.
I'm just going to take this initial idea that I had about an appraisal of the challenge of this anti-Western bias, And I think I'm just going to make that the whole paper. So that's what I did. And I thought it would give me a little more space to maybe delve into this with a little bit more detail. It's still a short paper. It's still somewhat of a gloss on the topic, but at least, at least I could go into it a little bit more deeply and then maybe come back later and write something else longer, maybe even a short little book that would deal um, not only with the bias that could be a part of that, but also an apologia for it, and then also a proposal for the implementation or some ideas, at least for the implementation of the Western Rite. So I stated this clearly in the paper because I concerned that someone might misunderstand what I was trying to do, and I make it clear that there's no attempt here to address all the objections that people might raise in any detail. There's no attempt to provide a comprehensive philosophy or apologetic. I hint at those things, between the lines a little bit, but that's not what
Right.
this is about. This really the aim of the paper. It's an appraisal of this challenge that faces us in orthodoxy in this anti-Western sentiment and bias. And the case I make is that it's resulted in really a polemical and exaggerated, use of dichotomies between East and West, and then sort of how that has hurt, damaged, hindered, hampered our mission as the Orthodox Church in the West.
Now,
So that's
you
kind of
you
the
kick this off by with a personal anecdote, just kind of a personal little bit of a testimony about how those polemics in sort of a rubber meets the road way actually kept you out of the Orthodox Church for a while.
yeah.
I think you mentioned how you had started catechism, and you were coming in and you were attracted to the Orthodox faith in all of its Eastern glory, and somehow managed to find yourself then switching gears a little bit, and was it that there was some offense? It became a hindrance. What once was attractive became a hindrance. So
Yes.
what happened with
Yeah,
your
well,
story?
exactly, and it became a major stumbling block for me that kept me out of the church for 15, 17 years. It was not a small
Hmm.
little blip in my journey.
Yeah.
It was a big deal for me personally, and I think as I talk about this, I wonder how many other people have been affected in a similar way.
Yeah.
I
That's not
know.
a stumbling block. That's a roadblock. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's a
that's
slam door for a lot of people. So I would like to
right.
talk about that in a little more detail, um, a little bit later. But to answer your immediate question, I mean, I fell head over heels in love with orthodoxy the first moment I caught, just caught a glance of her, walking by in the shadows. There was no hesitation on my part
Yeah.
whatsoever. The Easternness, the cultural differences, the music, the vestments, all of it, the icons, I immediately fell in love, and so none of that was a hindrance for me. Um, and I embraced everything I read and heard, even the entire anti-Western bias. I embraced it. I swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. I mean, I became, you know, as a disciple, I was being catechized in all of that rhetoric and polemic, anti-Western polemic. And as I was growing to love the Eastern Church, I was being taught really to despise. That sounds harsh, but I did. I was being taught to despise the West and, even traditional Western Christianity. They went
Hmm.
hand in hand. I mean, it was commensurate. I mean, the level of my love for the East was measured by, I think I wrote, the level of my scorn for the West. And
Right.
and I don't think this is unique to my experience. I think that this is pretty normal for a lot of people. Um, so
And just for the listeners, what background were you coming out of again
Well,
when you were
I had grown.
fell in love with the Orthodox?
I was in on the journey looking for apostolic Christianity. So I grew up Baptist, but I had at this point, we were searching for traditional Christianity. So we were sort of evangelicals, trying to do liturgy.
Hmm.
Think of, if you're familiar with the EOC back in the day, think of a group similar to that.
Sure.
Um,
Yep.
so so we were. I didn't come out of a liturgical background, but we were on a journey, sort of, in that direction. And there's been lots of movements like that maybe people are familiar with. But but I think over time that this became a crisis for me. This sort of anti-Western sentiment became a crisis for me. It snuck up on me. I don't really know how it happened. It was really a conviction thing, like an interior thing in my heart. I started to feel like something wasn't right,
Hmm.
in myself. I felt like the scorn, just the attitudes that were developing in me towards all things Western. There was something that was ugly about that inside of myself, and I began to sort of question it. And the more I began to think about it, pray about it, question it, and roll it around in my mind, it started to become a crisis that I couldn't get over. And I thought, how can this church that I'm learning to love, this Eastern Orthodox Church, its claims to be the Catholic faith for all peoples, all nations, and all times, how does
Right.
that jive? How does that fit with a seeming disinterest in anything that's not Eastern? Like, and in
Yeah.
America, and all the billions of people that don't fit that cultural program. Or what about the great fathers and saints and martyrs of the West? Like, where do they fit in? Not
Mhm.
just in textbooks, but like, how do they fit into the daily life of an Orthodox Christian? Like, and the devotional life, the prayers, the liturgies, all of this is just like, it's just cut off and lost. And like, nobody seems to like really be that interested in it. Like, it's not important. I didn't know anything at all. I mean, I was total neophyte. I mean, I was reading lots of books, but um, that question plagued me, and I couldn't get really good answers from Orthodox people I was asking, about this question. They just all told me, "Oh, well, that's because the West." The intimation was the West was never really Orthodox, which is a very dangerous place to go. They never really said that, but that was kind of intimated. Well, it went off the rails with, at this date, or it went off the rails at that date. And if you kept pressing people, what they really thought was it went off the rails with Augustine. And you think, well, if it went off the rails with Augustine, why not? Maybe it went off the rails sooner, and then if it went off sooner, maybe the West never really was Orthodox. Because along with this whole sort of polemic, there was this great defense of, to be Orthodox means, the East is where it's at. The whole mindset, the phronema and the atmosphere, and all of this is Eastern, and the West was always a little out of sync, never really quite got it. And
Right.
so all of that was being, you know I was just eating that up, and as I ate it, it was sweet in my mouth, but when it got into my belly, it turned bitter. And
Was there any like do you recall any moment of revelation, or was it just sort of a gradual beginning to sort of miss some of those familiar,
it was
at home kind of forms of liturgy and
no,
worship, or
I didn't miss anything. That wasn't a part of it. I
okay,
wasn't I
okay,
wasn't missing anything. It really was, that was not the issue for me at the time. It
okay.
really was, I started to feel convicted of sin. I felt bad.
Hmm.
I felt ugly. I had a lot of vitriol against the Pope, for example, and papism and the papists, and it was just arrogance. I can't stand it. I didn't like myself. And there was this arrogance, and it started to bother me, and I thought, what am I going to do? So I do remember this. I can answer that question. I was living at a in a monastery, a Benedictine monastery in Maryland at the time. And I remember being up in I had a little office area kind of tucked under the stairs. And I remember wrestling with this, and I thought, what am I going to do? And I thought, I have an idea. I'm going to start praying for the Pope. Like, God couldn't get mad at me for praying for somebody. So, it doesn't mean I'm a papist. I mean, I hated the papacy, or, I saw it as a great evil or whatever. And I'll pray. I'll pray for the Pope. And so I started praying for the Pope, and then I started praying for Western Christians and whatnot. And my heart started to change.
Hmm.
I mean, I still believed in Orthodoxy, and I believed her claims, and
Sure,
I believed
sure,
she was a
but
true faith, but my attitude started to slowly change
that's
towards Western
that's
Christianity.
powerful. I mean, the change in your heart corresponding with a decision and the action to follow through with actually praying for people is I think that's beautiful, compelling,
Well,
very compelling.
I mean, that's always the way that God has worked with me. I've always begun with prayer and then sort of figured out the theology later. I mean, that's how I got to be okay with our Blessed Mother. you know, I think I've told that story before. Um, you can cut this off if it makes it too long, but I'll tell it real quick. It's an important story in my life. As a Baptist, I had adopted these Orthodox prayers. I was praying 7 times a day, and when I got to the hymn of Mary in these prayers, I would skip it because I felt uncomfortable because I was Baptist. I mean, I just felt uncomfortable. So after about three,
Right.
4 months of praying the prayers, I started to feel more uncomfortable not praying the prayer to Mary and hymning her than I did praying it. So I was stuck and I had no one to guide me. So I thought to myself, I had no theology of Mary, no Marian theology, no understanding of her role in the economy of salvation. Um, and I thought, what am I going to do? I thought I'm pretty arrogant here by just like editing out a prayer that's been prayed by
Yeah.
great saints for
Ripping this
centuries
off.
and thousands of years.
Right.
So that occurred to me, the arrogance, and I started to get real uncomfortable with that. And so I sat down and I said, Lord, I don't know what to do. I'm going to say this prayer. I hope it's not upsetting to you. I hope it's not wrong. Remember, I knew nothing. So I just said, I'm going to say it. And I started saying the prayer to Mary. And before you know it, I started to feel like I was developing a relationship with Mary.
Yeah.
She became a
Yeah.
real person to me. And I realized she's not a problem to be solved. She's a person to know.
Absolutely. I
And
had a very similar experience coming from a Southern Baptist background
yeah,
to a liturgical and apostolic and eventually Orthodox uh, Christianity, and that was the same for me. It took praying it. It took familiarity with the prayers, a sense of sort of feeling at home after I understood it, felt comfortable. Well, not even comfortable, familiar first, and then comfortable, and then I was able to. It unlocked the theology, the
yeah,
anthropology, the soteriology. It all started clicking once I had the ears to hear, as it were.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, I mean, to me, it sounds like all of this is following after the Orthodox understanding that a true theologian is one who prays.
yeah. Well,
Prayer and theology are intimately, inseparably linked.
who knew? So I don't know.
Who knew?
I just stumbled along in
It's almost like yes, someone should have said this at some point,
yeah.
but so we didn't have to learn it on our own.
I was just trying to just
Anyways, I
stumble
interrupted
along in
you.
the dark.
So
So, yeah, so I think that was, I think in my memory, that is a very distinct, profound memory of deciding to pray for the Pope, and it changed my heart. And it took me years after that. Years. I'm still, I mean, I feel like I'm just beginning to understand the relationship between the Eastern and Western Church, some of the doctrinal questions, and the culture and the rites and all of that. So I knew nothing then, but my heart was sort of being made. I think it was being tilled in such a way that it could at least explore these things ironically with an open mind and without biases and prejudices and arrogance, especially. um, and so that sort of tilled the soil and got it ready for the next 20-25 years
Hmm.
to come of beginning to delve into some of this stuff. And I would have never, not in a million years would I have ever thought I would have been a Western Rite priest. I mean, I didn't like the West. I didn't like anything about it. And I had really honed my lacerations of all things Western as an evangelist. I had my arguments, well developed, but things didn't turn out the way that I thought, and my heart was changed. And God led us here, and now my life is committed to seeing the this part of our Holy Orthodox Apostolic Catholic tradition, um, you know, new life breathed into it in the church, and see it revitalized in our midst as a living way of life for us in our Western culture. And I think it's absolutely critical, critically important that we do this. I think Orthodoxy. Um, I, I don't know. I couldn't state it strong enough. I remember talking to a monk. Oh boy, it's been 30-25 years ago. And I remember him telling me, he said that the most important challenge facing Orthodox is, what is it going to do with the Western culture? Is it going to assimilate? Is it going to, this challenge that faces it? What's it going to do? And that
Yeah.
rings in my ears. I don't know if you know this statistic or not. I'm not a statistician, but somebody said that relative to the population in America, Orthodoxy in the last 100 years, relative to the population, has not grown at all.
I believe, yes, I believe that is that's a statistic I have heard. I don't remember where it's from. If anyone listening feels like reaching out to let us know where that stat may have come from, please do. And yeah, that's a remarkable stat. There's no growth. I mean, hey, no losses, right?
Right.
Good. Which is not, it's nothing to sneeze at given our current culture and situation, with more and more and more people either declaring themselves atheist or agnostic, but so much more, at least claiming themselves to be unaffiliated. They believe something, but they're not affiliated with any particular thing. So, but it still, though, there's no growth in the population, then the church is, well, failing at her job, frankly.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I've just empirically, my question is, and I raised this in the paper briefly, although I probably should have spent more time on it. I think it's one of the most salient questions when it comes to missions. Now that this is a this is just one rationale for the importance of the Western Rite in Eastern Orthodoxy. It's not, in my book, it's not even the most important. To a lot of people, it's probably speaks the loudest to them. It's the most convincing. For me, it's not. For me, just I think the way I think about it, there's the Catholicity issue, and our own tradition and reclaiming that is for me the most important. But when it comes to missions and the church's mission in the West, and being able to reach peoples in all nations and cultures, um, this is a pretty profound question. Whether we really think that we are going to be able to do that without a Western Rite, without a Western
Mm,
reclaiming our Western tradition. We haven't been able to do it yet. I mean, I don't people somebody does people think that there's going to be like some magical like flip of a switch and all of a sudden everything's going to change? Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I guess things might
yeah,
get better, but I'm not sure it will ever happen if we don't have a very robust, lively, energetic Western Rite in
right.
Eastern Orthodoxy in America.
And that's where you end your paper. That's the point that you conclude on. Um, but and we need to flesh that out some more. But maybe could you sort of walk us through how you get to that conclusion, beginning with just recognizing at first, like you had to coming into the Orthodox Church, that there is a polemical problem, that the polemical anti-Western sentiment or bias is very widespread. It runs very deep. It's almost unconscious. It's assumed to be true, and so it's hardly even thought about critically in a lot of places, publications, sermons, blog posts, articles, and just coffee talk.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe could you just sort of describe the problem?
Oh, it's you're right. It's so pervasive, and it's in between the lines. I mean, it's overt in many cases, and sometimes it's just an atmosphere. Um, but when I engage other Orthodox Christians who have suspicions or objections to the Western Rite, and you begin to dig a little bit deeper and try and understand where they're coming from and understand what their concerns are, you began to see that a lot of their objections are based on uh, a lot of misunderstanding, both about misunderstanding about Western Christianity, um, and also about Orthodoxy, quite frankly. So it starts to get very complicated in a way.
And that's very, I mean, that's if you question someone who's Orthodox, if you question their understanding of their own faith, that's that's some tender areas right
Yeah,
there that
it's
you're
yeah. This whole
beginning to poke at.
to be totally frank, I don't even really want to be having this conversation. I mean, honestly, I really don't.
Don't
Um,
have much of an appetite
I,
for
I,
controversy.
no, I mean, I love my church. I'm the least of my brothers, and I mean, who am I to even be talking about any of this? I don't know, and I don't want to be misunderstood. Um, but I don't know. It just seems like this conversation has to happen, and here we are. So
I think I'm I'm prepared to hear you as someone speaking honestly and humbly about an issue that truly and legitimately troubles your heart, and I think our listeners are going to be able to follow with you. So
well,
proceed.
okay. So I think that there are a lot of faulty premises that just become assumed. Um, I mean, one of the most serious ones is that Augustine taught that we are inherit Adam's guilt.
Hmm.
This has caused so many problems, and this has just become axiomatic. Well, Augustine didn't teach that. Certainly not in the way that you hear it in most, catechism classes and these days. And there's somebody who's responsible for perpetuating that, um, and a lot of other things as well. Um, that's just misleading, and so we've begun to, as Orthodox Christians, we begin to. Anyway, let me back up a little bit. So when you're having these conversations about maybe why should we have a Western Rite, there's all kinds of misunderstandings about the schism, the 1054 so-called schism and what that means. Um, there's people on the internet and books and blogs who get on there and pontificate about all kinds of things. And I specifically call it pontificating because, we're anti-papists. And yet, how many Orthodox people um, issue their opinions, and they are opinions because we haven't had, there's no authoritative council that has spoken to such and such an issue, but people are not shy about, ushering their opinions in a pontifical manner as if this is the teaching of the Orthodox Church. And this happens all the time. And people just embrace this stuff. I mean, recently there was somebody on social media was asking if Gothic architecture was, heterodox or unorthodox, essentially unorthodox. And people have waxed eloquent about all kinds of things, about crucifixes and pews, and I don't know. And then there's been more serious issues about how the West moves from a philosophical understanding, um, from the one to the many, and the East moves from the many to the one. And some pretty important Orthodox theologians maybe put this forth in a book that they wrote, and then it got taken up and repeated over and over again, and it became just sort of like urban myth, that this is the truth of the thing.
Hmm.
Vladimir Lossky, his description of Anselm's model of the atonement has become pretty much conventional wisdom in Orthodoxy, except that he got it
Right.
wrong. He was wrong.
Yeah.
He was wrong. It was as if he never even read Anselm.
Yeah.
Um,
Anselm's, uh, on why God became man is, it's quite subtle in a lot of ways.
so it's there's many examples. Thomas Aquinas, he's been. I always talk about the three boogeymen, the three A's: Augustine, um, Aquinas, and Anselm, and all three of them have been maligned and misrepresented. And you know, um, Dr. Marcus Plested, an Orthodox theologian, professor at Marquette, has written a great book about Orthodox readings in Aquinas, and he's given us sort of a corrected view of how the Greeks viewed Aquinas once he was translated, and he was
Hmm.
he was revered, actually. I didn't think he got everything right, but who does? I mean, Scholaris said he was a great mind, and should be highly respected as a
It's almost
theologian.
like, like, on the other end, Roman Catholics reading, a post, quote unquote, post schism saint, from the East, and recognizing, wow, this is full of great theology, wonderful points, a lot of stuff to chew on and think about here. Someone important that we should, hold on to, and hold in high regard, even if they're not in our immediate communion.
Mhm.
Anyway, yeah, it's not a stretch to imagine that sort of thing happening if you
Right.
kind of think about it.
But I don't think, I think when we start to like give examples and unpack some of these things, and there's so many examples that we could give, but um, I think what you begin to see is you can't just dive right into an apologetic for the Western right. You've got to step back and go down under the surface and deal with some of these assumptions
Right,
that have become
right.
maxims in Orthodox polemics, and readdress some of this stuff. And that is being done by scholars in the Orthodox world, um, both for Augustine and Aquinas, and others, and other situations, and things. Um, I mean, Florovsky was very important in all of this, in his work. So that's being done. But once you get under the surface, um, there is a large matrix of tangled roots which need to be dealt with, I think, before you can sort of begin to have a coherent discussion about the importance of the Western tradition and the Western rite within Orthodoxy.
Hmm.
And so I think that's why we have to talk. We have to at least start the conversation with addressing this anti-Western bias, and calling attention to it.
Sure.
For me, it started out initially. It just started out as a matter of sin. I felt it was sinful before God and myself, and I just felt it was unpleasing. It was a lack of charity. It was rooted in arrogance. It was also rooted in a um, laziness. Like, I liked cheap. It was just better, easier to make cheap arguments, to make my case. So I could just build up straw men and tear them down, and make these cheap arguments and win converts and make my case. And who doesn't like doing that? you know um
Yeah.
but we need to take responsibility for that. There's too much of that going on, and it just it can't be pleasing to God. So that was, for me, that was the first
Yeah.
step in the right direction, I think. um I think that I think that what motivates a lot of good Orthodox people is that they're trying to protect Orthodox purity, you know?
I was about to say, like, I had a similar. I don't want to get into my biographical stuff, but I had a kind of similar experience. It was not nearly as uh, extended as your journey. It was a little fast tracked, probably because I'm not as diligent, faithful, or careful thinker. So I'm just like, yeah, this is good over here. Let's. Oh, wow, here's a new idea. Let's check that out. But I had a similar experience in that when I encountered Orthodoxy, not for the first time. I will say that some of my first encounters with not the Orthodox faith, but Orthodox people were of aloof, um, Lord forgive me, uh, proud, maybe people proud of their own situation and tradition. People who had a distinct sort of habit of looking down on lowly American Anglicans who, oh, those Anglicans don't know what they're doing. And so some of those first experiences were negative, but when I started actually looking into the faith of the great Orthodox fathers, and how so many of them, were east of Eastern Italy, and
Mhm.
so kind of fell into the Byzantine liturgical camps. I just started identifying, probably unconsciously, um, Eastern Orthodoxy with apostolic Christianity, which is what I had always been after. That was my journey, like you said was yours similarly, and so I also had sort of this notion that eventually the easy thing to do in my mind was to link uncritically Eastern Orthodoxy with apostolic Christianity, and that was compelling and convincing for a while. And I also don't remember exactly how it happened, but eventually, at some point, some concepts of Western liturgics, Western devotions, Western spirituality was presented to me in a light that also sort of aligned with it. It was not contradictory to, but was another example of apostolic Christianity, the faith of the apostles, but was clearly distinct from that Eastern tradition. And so what happened in my own heart and my own mind was this dissonance. Like, before I was able to work any of it out, it was dissonance at first.
Mhm.
It was uncomfortable and inconvenient, and I had to grapple um, with how different liturgical and devotional traditions could both be legitimate continuations of the apostolic faith, i.e., the Orthodox faith.
Mhm.
Um, and that was a journey that I kind of went on my own. And honestly, had I not come from a Western liturgical background and been involved deeply in Western liturgics before journeying toward Orthodoxy, I'm not sure that I would have had the anchor that held me. So, frankly, the thing that really tipped it over the edge was when my parish was coming into the Orthodox Church. It was Bishop John Abdullah,
Mhm.
our,
Yes.
our our bishop overseeing the Western Rite Vicariate, who encouraged us. You stick to um, your identity.
Yeah.
You come into the church, but don't leave your stuff. And
Mm.
once I had that permission from a hierarch, it allowed me. It's almost like the prayer thing, Once
Mhm.
once you actually pray the prayers, you unlock something that that makes you able to conceptualize everything that had been a struggle before.
Yeah.
So that was the final unlocking key, was an Orthodox bishop saying, keep your heritage, keep your identity, join the church, receive our sacraments, and practice our faith.
Right.
And none of those were presented in any kind of contradictory terms, and that made all the difference. But
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you for
yeah,
sharing that. Hmm. I didn't know that story. That's what Bishop John had told you. That's wonderful to
he
hear that.
did. Yeah, that's what he did for us. So yeah, you were talking about sort some of these polemics and um,
Yeah, I mean, it's for me, I guess, just to sort of boil it down, the problem with polemics, first, it's a lack of charity. It's a sin of arrogance. It undermines our Catholic witness because we're basically sort of denying half of ourselves. It's self-sabotaging. I mean, we're refuting our own body, our own tradition, our own saints, our own rights. Um, and so we're suppressing our own Catholic history and experience. So that's a huge problem. For me, that really was the biggest problem. That's what got me the most after I started changing my heart about it. So it's reductionist and it's impoverishing. Now, when you think of orthodoxy, the last thing you think about is reductionist. So
you think of
you
fullness.
think of fullness, and it's true, especially with the Byzantine, you know, uh, the Byzantine sort of approach to worship and the aesthetic and all of that. More is more, right?
A lot of
Um,
icons, a lot of litanies,
yeah, yeah.
a lot of saints on the calendar.
but
Right.
but here we are giving up something grand and venerable and imbued with the scent of holiness. I mean, part of the great tradition of the church, and we're like turning our back on it, and that just makes no sense to me whatsoever. So especially with an Orthodox mind, we should be taking everything that belongs to us. I think it's just got to be out of an insecurity or a fear, or I don't know, an
Now,
us versus
where does
them
that
mentality.
right? Where does that insecurity and fear originate? In your article, you bring up something called the Byzantine lists. What are those?
Oh boy. So, um, let me finish my thought if you don't mind, because I have two more little things in
Sure.
this. So
Sure.
so lack of charity was the first one, and
I like
impoverished.
that your thoughts are organized
Well,
because mine are not.
they're not usually organized, but I did have this particular thought in some order. So there's the undermining or the suppressing of our Catholic witness and history, and then it's dangerous. And this point I make in the paper, it's very dangerous to do theology via polemics because it leads to a heterodox self concept.
Hmm.
So when we
Hmm.
define ourselves in opposition to our enemy or what we're against, we will end up doing damage to our own orthodox self concept. And I fear that that has actually happened to some extent. I mean, that is precisely what happened with the Reformation. I mean, and that's what we mean by they threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
At least that's one aspect of that little colloquial saying. And I
Sure.
think that we are in danger as Orthodox Christians today in our anti-papism, anti-this, anti-that. Um, you know, we're in danger of kind of committing the same mistake. Um, so so I think that's
Yeah.
a very serious problem. Um, but this back to your question about, and we can come back to this in a minute, but your question about the Byzantine lists, one of the realizations. So I thought that anti-Western bias originally, I kind of thought it came with a lot of the converts who always, hated Rome, and this just allowed them to be full blown, apostolic sacramental and still hate Rome. Um, then I realized I started learning more, and I realized, well, it goes back further than that. And then I discovered, Romanides and Azekul and the Slavophiles and the Western captivity. They're going to liberate us from that, and how the Greeks were going to. They were upset about all the Greeks being, uh, you know, indoctrinated in Italian schools in Latin with Latin categories, and they're going to liberate us from all of that indoctrination and from the pernicious West. And so I started to really think, okay, well, maybe that's the real source of this anti-Western bias. Um, and but really, and this is the hardest pill to swallow, I think. I think that this has been going on, really a lot longer than that. And you go back 1,000 years, and there's this entire genre of writings called the Byzantine lists. There's not just one list. There's numerous lists, and this whole anti-Western sentiment is found, in these lists, and they're basically written to enumerate all the heretical and impious errors of the Latins, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
was the entire thing is built on this us versus them polemic. And they're not primarily concerned with dogmatics, but primarily with practices, devotional practices, cultural, ritual differences, things, fasting,
Mm-hmm.
disciplines,
Right.
even how you were dressed, whether you wore a beard. I mean, these things were very. I just read an article recently about the beard thing. Um, so whether you were clean shaven or not, and on some level, some people, might look at these. A lot of Orthodox people still draw on these to denounce the West. Perhaps the more polemical people in our ranks would still use these lists as a support to denounce the West. Other people might say, well, a lot of this is superficial rants. But I don't think they're trivial. Certainly, they're not trivial. These lists aren't. Um, and let me say something positive about them. What they do is they demonstrate the relationship, the correct, that there is a very strong relationship between doctrine, culture, and ritual. There is. I mean, like,
Mm.
we identify the faith through these cultural expressions, through our language.
Absolutely.
And there
Right.
is
Right.
nothing wrong with that. That's actually good. That's a very
Yep. Yep.
positive and good thing, right? So Orthodox people understand this. They understand how important the culture and the ritual is to the expression of the faith of a people in a given context. So we're in agreement
Mm-hmm.
on that, right? We want to really make that.
Yes.
We want to really make that point really, really strongly,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
So yeah, absolutely. We do not want to downplay the importance of the liturgical forms, the cultural expressions of devotion in the role that those things play in the formation of the hearts of people.
exactly. So it's understandable that the Byzantines were concerned about ritual differences that the Latins had. It's understandable. They're like, wait a minute, we don't do it that
Sure.
way, and this is so. We identify our faith through these forms, and the problem is those concerns led to a really bad, in my view, conclusion. The polemics um, led them to dogmatize particular cultural forms and rituals, making other
Okay.
cultural forms and rituals heretical or unorthodox. So that's where things, went awry. And there was this pattern goes way
Yeah.
back of condemning the other side over accidentals.
And we're talking about the Byzantine list because this was this developed into a sort of an art form. There were multiple documents that sort of
Yes.
follow this format, but the West was not uh, off the hook in reciprocating. I'm sure. I know that there were multiple instances of historical proofs and records of the West, the Roman Church, for example, poking at those Greeks over there and the way that they do this or that.
Yes,
And so this
absolutely.
this wasn't this wasn't a one-sided thing. It's not like
Right.
the West was this totally open ecumenical. Hey, you guys are great, and we're great. We're all great. The
No,
West did this as well.
they did it well.
Yeah,
There's no
yeah.
question they did. There's no question they did. I would, and I have a friend who's like, he disagrees with me about this a little bit. He says, I think everybody's equal. Everybody's an equal offender. And I'm like, well, I don't know about
Well,
that. Have you ever?
everybody's an
There's no,
offender.
there's no. Yes, everybody's an offender. Everybody has their besetting sin. Okay, and I'm not saying the
Sure.
West's doesn't. Their besetting sins are just as bad as the East's, but everybody's got their besetting sin. I don't know if that's fair to target an entire geographic area, but
West and East.
yeah, or
What
lingual.
does that mean?
But yeah, what's that? Anyway, but aside from that, um, I would just like to point out there's no such thing as the Latin lists.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I mean this genre was invented by the Byzantines, and they're the ones that perpetuated it. So it's not like the Latins never did this. That's true, but they
It's
never.
probably not without cause that the term Byzantine grew in the Western vocabulary to sort of be an adjectival description of
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
overly complicated, nitpicky, sort of, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah. So
And it probably originated around this time period that the Byzantine lists became a genre.
yeah, I mean, as far as I understand, that's true. So, so anyway, all that to say, and I'm sure people could, raise points or objections or questions about what we're saying. We're just, sort of talking about this in a loose manner. But I think the point that I wanted to make um, was let's stop and think about what's driving the Byzantines to make these lists and these
Mm.
critiques. It is the fact that they um, recognize their faith so intertwined with their cultural ritual forms and experiences, but so much so that they have dogmatized those things.
Hmm.
But
Right.
what's the what's the 300-pound pink elephant in the room then? The West has its own venerable forms, so are that have been inspired by the Spirit, right? Planted by the apostles, nurtured by the piety of the saints and the blood of the saints. So the West has a culture. It has its rites, its devotional forms and practices, its cultural expression that is equally, um, you know, enmeshed with with the Orthodox faith. And so there's like total lack of recognition of this. It's like just somebody has blinders on. They see how important it is for them, but don't recognize its importance for the venerable West. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So yes. So the concept behind the Byzantine list is the idea, and this is you make this point in the very heading in your article, the idea that a different form means a different faith. And I had thought about this. I've wrestled with this before. We have Saint Vincent of Lerone, a Western saint, interestingly, who famously kind of gave us the his so-called Vincentian canon of that which is ancient, universally recognized, and widely practiced,
Mhm.
and that the way that we pray both reflects and directs what we believe.
Right.
And so the question then becomes, if you pray differently than me, does that mean you believe differently than me? Does the form of your worship indicate a difference in our faith? And that's what was behind the Byzantine lists, the problems they had with Western liturgics. You guys are doing this differently, and we could say we can make an argument. We can present a paper and defend a thesis in front of our professors that because you are shaving your faces or you are depicting Christ in the form of a lamb in some iconography, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, um, you believe differently than we do about
Right.
the very core of our faith.
Right.
So that's what's at stake, essentially, right? That's if
Yes.
if that thesis is true, if our faith is attached to the form of our worship, and the form of our worship reflects and directs our faith, then is it not a legitimate critique to point out these differences and say, hey, this isn't what we do. So if you're doing something different, maybe you believe something different. How do we wrestle with that? What do we do with that?
Well, I think it's quite simple. I think that the way that you've posed the question is making a false assumption. It's built on a false premise. I don't think that we're misapplying form here, and we're misapplying the Vincent's canon and the understanding of that. We use different languages. I mean, there's nothing more important than language, and language carries with it all kinds of cultural implications and understandings and categories. So it radically affects the form. Language does. So let's just use that because that's really simple to
Okay.
understand. We as Orthodox, we defend the use of the vernacular, and that the form of our prayers in the language of the people, and that massively impacts all kinds of things, just vocabulary, just what nature or substance, or I mean the words that we use and how we understand them to express our doctrine is a challenge through language. But we don't think everybody should be speaking the same, has to be speaking the same language in their prayers. um, he's certainly not talking about um, we don't have the same cultural forms at all. I mean, this is just historically not, the church has never um, emphasized this universally. That's what I'm saying. I think that this tendency to dogmatizing cultural forms is really was a move in the wrong direction. I mean, it's dare I say a almost a Judaizing type tendency. Um, that you have to be circumcised in order to be a Christian, that you have to have a beard in order to be a real Orthodox Christian. Um,
That would pose a real problem for 50% of the Orthodox population who
well,
happen to be females.
well, it poses a lot of
Uh,
problem for a lot of priests and bishops who aren't wearing beards these days.
yeah, or who can grow a very wiry one at
Um,
best,
this is just a
present
really funny
company
aside.
included.
Most of the Western Rite priests all have big bushy beards, or at least a lot of them do. The ones around me do. Um, so back to your question. I think it's a misapplication of the the dictum, in terms of the way that we pray. Way is not referring to, um, you know, cultural ritual differences. The church has always embraced cultural ritual differences in her rites and devotions and expressions. So the way can't be referring to that.
Hmm.
Um, the church from day one has been appropriating and baptizing pagan culture, um, and unapologetically taking it and saying this belongs to us because anything that is can be good and true is ours because it all belongs to the one true God whom we worship, because he is a creator of all things. And so
Right.
the glory of Christianity is to take everything, claim everything. Everything belongs to us because, our God is the one true God. So that's why you go into the catacombs and you see iconography that is directly taken from paganism. And all through Christianity, Christianity has adopted, you know, Greek philosophical categories and pagan things. I mean, in our own day, a lot of people like to point to how the Russian church in Alaska transformed and baptized the native spirit houses. And but like I said, you go in the catacombs. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, um, where he's holding the lamb on his shoulders.
Right.
That's a pagan image, totally pagan image associated with the god of Hermes. Is Korophoros, I can't remember the Greek term. This figure, and there we have all the statues. It's an exact replica. This man with a ram around his shoulders going through the city to avert some natural disaster. That's the most dominant image in the catacombs.
Hmm.
Jesus is pictured as Orpheus with the lyre in the catacombs. The woman with her outstretched hands, which is probably the most ubiquitous image that we have in all of iconography of prayer of our Blessed Mother with her outstretched arms. This image was directly taken from a pagan deity in a temple. That they had a statue of a person praying with outstretched hands on behalf of people who were out working in their fields and couldn't be in the temple all the time. There was an inscription down about the base of the statue that said, basically fill in for me while I can't be here and pray before the God. That's where that
Hmm.
image comes from. Christianity, this is not an embarrassment to Christianity. This is the glory of our faith. So there's a very different attitude that goes back to the earliest days of Christianity, about these kinds of things. We're not afraid of anything, you know. Um,
So what does it say? What is it, or what happens to our faith if it becomes so weak that it isn't able to bear an expression outside of an exacting, liturgical book with like, like what is so the Orthodox Church is the name that we use for our church now. And that term, it means the straight, as almost as opposed to the crooked faith, right? The straight church, Orthodox. Not the crooked church, not the deviating church, not the one straying into heresy, but the straight one, straight and narrow. But that word is actually not in the creed that we profess of ourselves. The word that most, completely defines us, besides one holy and apostolic, is Catholic, meaning full,
mhm,
according to the whole,
right.
Catholicos. So, is there a difference in Orthodox and Catholic? Are those two terms contradictory, or are they a mysterious sort of paradox that we can both be completely whole and also completely plumb, straight, narrow, unbending, unerring?
Well, I
I
think,
mean, this kind of gets to the core of our faith.
yeah,
If our faith does not mean the the collection of Eastern liturgical books, but rather what built those books. Where do those books come from? How were they inspired to be written? What what was the faith of the saints composing all of these Triparia and Cantacia? What made the faith that inspired those writings recognized by the church as orthodox? The church was just as orthodox before these Triparia and Cantacia were composed,
hmm,
right?
sure,
So now, why would we say that orthodoxy is equivalent with the collection of liturgical texts and nothing else?
right.
Is is it just too scary to have the imagination that God can do and work incredible, wonderful things among all people and draw them to his Orthodox Church? Like to me, all of those the content of those liturgical books presents for us a measure by which to measure everything else. The question isn't so much are you using these books as are is what you're using to pray conformed to these books? Do they show out the same faith? Do they both conform to the one measure, the one canon, the one plumb line, the one ruler and standard, which is Jesus Christ and his life revealed through the Holy Spirit? Sorry if I just started preaching
No, no,
there.
I think that was, I'm thinking about what you're saying. I mean, I think these are, I don't have answers to these questions. I mean, obviously we believe it's the Holy Spirit who preserves the church. And this is a metaphysical reality. The church is the church, and the Holy Spirit has preserved and will continue to preserve the church, um, no matter what. But I agree with you. We can't. We have to be people of the Spirit, and we recognize our dogmatics and our doctrine, our councils, our creeds, and our synods and our canons, and all of that is the fleshing out of the life of the Spirit in our lives. But there are different iconographic traditions and styles. I mean, we've seen in the whole iconology world people dogmatizing certain things that were never meant to be. um this is what a real icon is.
Hmm,
And I think
right.
there's people are sort of like challenging in that now quite a bit. You hear more
Yeah.
iconographers challenging that. But you see that trend. It's just a human trend. But
Sure.
if we do that with a single rite or devotional practice, or if we criticize the West because they have three-dimensional, statuary or a three-dimensional crucifix, and somehow that's unorthodox because it's fleshly, because it's
Or a
three-dimensional.
crucifix that sort of more realistically depicts the
Right.
moment, the human, external human suffering, as opposed to the more deified victory. It's like these these are both ands. You can have images that do one or the other, or both to varying degrees and in
I
varying
mean,
ways.
the liturgy of the. I would like to throw in here just as a bit of a sort of a caveat. Um, Personally, we are, at St. Patrick's, and myself, I'm really, I think of myself as kind of a very conservative person. Like when it comes to the liturgy and how we do things, we're extremely conservative, and that is totally my bent. So I don't want anybody to misunderstand this conversation. about reverence for what has been handed down, and fidelity to that. Um,
Hmm.
in terms of the tradition, and even small t tradition, we don't. I hate making we don't make changes, and we do things the way they've been done, and are in that spirit. But I think, stepping back, in a broader conversation, looking at these issues, we do have to be very careful not to identify the tradition, the capital T, the tradition of the church, the faith, the deposit of faith, the apostolic faith, as it is expressed through various forms and rites and languages and cultures and devotional practices. You know, we would be making a huge mistake to, I think, make any one of those exclusive, and to sort of dogmatize a form.
And that's how you in your article is reflecting on sort of Catholicity, fullness, wholeness, not being not being closed off, being traditional, but observing the whole tradition. Tradition that has been preserved and maintained in various places and with various cultural expressions, and that's the Psalms describe for us how God is glorified in the multitudinous aspects of His creation.
Hmm.
Animals, things that creep and crawl, the beasts of the field, the trees, the hills, the clouds, the lightnings, the sky, the stars, all of these things sing together in sort of a harmony, and they all contribute without discord to the glory of God. And there's also plenty in the scriptures describing the nations from over the mountains and from across the seas, and it's these people all have their various histories, their own particular cultural expressions and traditions, and that's there in the Old Testament. It's there in the Book of Revelation at the very end of things. We see at the very end that nations are still coming to glorify God. These national identities still seem to be a reality at the very end of things, which is remarkable. We don't all sort of become this muddied heavenly culture. Heaven preserves somehow mystically the cultures of earth, and God continues to glorify in that. So to be glorified in that. So I think that's a beautiful place to end your article, and probably a decent place to end this talk tonight.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you for inviting me to have this chat.
absolutely, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed your article. Again, that was published in the Basilian Journal, the publication from the St. Basil Society. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes.
And is there any way for people to have access to that, to get to see it yet?
Yes. I've actually been given permission to publish the article. So it came out a while ago in print, and they said once it was out, we could go ahead and publish it. So it'll be on the orthodoxwest.com, on our website, on the journal page,
Okay.
and we'll get it up there probably, within about a week. And so people, if they're interested, can go there and take a look at it.
Okay. So hopefully by the time this airs, that will be published on the Orthodox West. So just go to theorthodoxwest.com /journal, or just follow the link to the journal page and find Father Patrick's article, Why the Eastern Orthodox Church Needs the Western Rite, Moving Past Polemics, Restoring the Whole Tradition, and Fulfilling Our Mission in the West. Wonderful article and great conversation.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again. I appreciate it. Look forward to more talks, more presentations here at the Orthodox West Gazette in the hopefully near future. And stay tuned. Follow us on our website. Follow us on Facebook, and stay connected to the Orthodox West. And we hope you all have a wonderful day or evening. And God bless.
God bless you. Thank you.